Way of life.
Right.
Now, as far as the system in America was never built for black people. And this is my personal opinion. I'm speaking for myself. I don't believe it was never built for black people because that system has never been changed. Those documents has never been altered. These things were made back in the umpteen hundreds. And these are the same exact literature that's down today. So mind you, at the time it was made, black people was never in a position where they were, looked at as equal. So if it's the same documents that they're applying today in 2014, it wasn't meant for them.
What was it like?
Hello, family. This is African Esquire, and welcome to the Federation of African Liberation. We are a Pan-Africanist organization seeking to organize the masses of African people throughout the diaspora for the purpose of mutual liberation of all of our people. So if you are interested in learning more about our organization or possibly joining our organization, you will find a link down below that will give you that information that you are looking for. So before I actually get into this, I actually want to also announce that FAL, we do have 2 live streams coming up. On October 21st at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be having our second Soapbox Mind live stream. If you didn't catch the last one, it was basically the leadership of FAL discussing different topics that can come up throughout the diaspora and giving our perspectives, our Pan-Africanist perspectives on these issues. And we had a pretty good broadcast last time, and I think this one's going to be even better because, as you all have probably been paying attention to, this week as far as things involving African people, black people, people throughout the world, there's been a lot of hoopla going on. So it's going to be a very good live stream at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday. Also, if you are an FAL member, on November 3rd at 2 p.m. we're going to be doing a membership only live stream, and what we mean by that is if you're a member and you want to participate in the live stream, you could actually send us an email at federationofafricanliberation@gmail.com and you can appear on the live stream with us. However, this will only be viewed by members, so it's only a members only broadcast, and that's where we will be discussing our initiatives as an organization and things that we are doing, and you could also discuss with us what you think we could improve on. It will be more interactive, so watch out for that November 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, so to the subject at hand. We're going to be talking about what is FAL's new platform as far as African Americans, so-called African Americans, Africans living in America, and what our position is on our ultimate solution to our issue. Some people might tell you that your solution to our issue is to vote. Some people might tell you your solution is to just start a business, and that's certainly important. Don't think that we don't condemn either of those actions. However, we're really posing a few questions. One, given, as African people, given what we know about the United States, how the United States has treated African people since the United States has started, we want to ask the question to African people, do you really believe in your logical mind? Maybe you believe it in your heart, but in your brain, when you put things together, 2 and 2 together, when you see how the times have not necessarily progressed, but really what you're seeing is the same thing happen in different ways. You're seeing, you might not be seeing slavery happen, but you're seeing the prison industrial complex happen. You might not see lynchings happening, but you certainly see police murders happening. Everything evolves, and regardless of how it evolves, lives are still lost, black lives are still lost, black lives are still destroyed. So seeing how you have witnessed the progression of our history, do you really believe that in any time in the near future or long-term future that African people in the United States will really be able to live in this country peaceably, will actually be able to live in this country without having to worry about getting shot walking down the street or murdered, actually be able to live in this country and enjoy the rights of citizenship? Now, some of you might believe that, but for those of you who don't believe that, then this platform would also be for you. And that is the platform that FAL is standing on, that the ultimate solution for Africans in America is not just to go back to Africa, like the Back to Africa movement has called for, but go back to New Africa. So when we say New Africa, what do you mean by New Africa? Well, what we mean by New Africa is currently Africa is under colonial occupation. Even though colonialism no longer exists, by way of neocolonialism, the same colonial powers that had power over these countries when colonialism did exist have retained power, have retained control of the resources. They maintain control of the leadership. They maintain control of the culture inside of a lot of these countries. And so although colonialism is not in fact is in place, it is de facto in place, in that colonialism is still achieving its goals the same way that it did prior to the 1960s. So given that fact, we can't just say go back to Africa, because as Professor Kahindi pointed out in his interview with Good Morning Britain, it's not just a matter of going back to Africa or going back to the Caribbean, going back to this place, because anywhere you go in the world as a black person, you are subjected to colonialism. You're subjected to neocolonialism. You are subjected to white power. You're subjected to the white man's ambitions, being the victim of the white man's ambitions. It's not a matter of just going somewhere and escaping this. You are going to be subjected to it until you regain power. So it's not just a matter of going back to Africa, but it's actually seeing a new Africa, working towards a new Africa. And the second way to look at the movement is going back to a free Africa. Freeing Africa from colonial oppression. So our work is not only to return to Africa, but to go back to an Africa where the resources are controlled by the people, where the leaders are not puppets who are serving white, Chinese, whatever, colonial masters who are calling the shots. Go back to Africa where the politicians are actually there serving the people, if politicians are actually in place. So go back to Africa that actually looks like what would be somewhere that African people could benefit from, could raise their children in, could not have to worry about mass violence or exploitation. Like I said, we just don't want to go back to Africa, but we want to go back to a free, liberated, and whole Africa. Africa at one time was that. Unfortunately, due to colonialism and still neocolonialism, it is no longer in that position. So that's why we're saying going back to a new Africa. So it's a lot like what Akon said. He said it recently in a video. When you think about it, America is not created for Africans, and it really isn't. The Constitution that so many of us quote, and I'm an attorney, so I quote the Constitution too, but I know darn well anytime that I quote it, anytime that I quote the Bill of Rights, anytime that I quote any type of legislation, that these things a lot of times were created specifically for white male property owners in mind. So while I might say, well, you know, we have a right to this, we have a right to that, this was not created for me. This was not created for my children. This was not created for my community. So whereas we live in a land, we are sojourners in a land that was not created for us. There is a continent, and there's many people on that continent who are striving to welcome Africans throughout the diaspora back into the continent. And because of this, we are saying that, you know what, rather than try to make something that hasn't been working work in America, and again, this is just my objective view. When you look at history, when you look at the progression of history, it's a bunch of people who a lot of times might be somewhat part of the establishment, who are African American, who are black, who are trying to make something work that it just don't want to work. You could keep trying to make integration work, but it's just not working. Education is still just as segregated as it was back whenever Brown versus Board of Education was going on. So this is still not working. The prison industrial complex is just even more intact than it was back in slavery, because it's become the new slavery. So we have people who are trying to make things work, but the institution doesn't want to work, because the institution actually is doing what it was created to do. The education system was not created to raise African children to think independently. It was not created to raise African children to see themselves as Africans, to actually look at themselves in a positive light as Africans. It was actually created to do the opposite. It was created to create a pseudo American, that, you know, you're not enjoying the good graces of America, but you're certainly able to, you know, pretend to be enjoying those graces. You're certainly able to pretend to fit into certain settings, but certainly it was not created to make African children who are independent, self-sufficient, who do not feel like they need a master, who actually feel like they can make a country, they can make a nation, they could nation build just as better than what has been done inside of this country. It wasn't created to foster that type of thought. So it's doing exactly what it was created to do. So, and same thing with the prison system. It's doing what it was created to do. It was not created to have African people who are given a fair shot. It was created to be, as Kanye, you know, as loony as he is, he did have a point. It was created as a trap door that even if you can't be a slave without crime, if you commit a crime, or a lot of incidences, you might not commit a crime, but you just suspected of committing a crime. If that happens, then you are once again subjected to slavery. So these are institutions that are living and breathing. These are white supremacist institutions. The purpose of these institutions are not to allow African people to rise in these institutions, but the purpose is to maintain white dominance. So when you look at these things, you look at the reason that they were built, the question is it reasonable to want to integrate into these institutions, despite the fact that you've not been able to completely integrate into the education system, the political system? But is it reasonable to still want to do that, although it was not created for you and for your well-being? And my answer would be it's not reasonable, that you only feel like you have to because you have been trained to think that there is no other universe that could exist. You have been trained and manipulated to think that African people, as African people, you cannot be self-sufficient. You cannot build your own. And part of the propaganda campaign that has happened inside of a lot of Western media is in order to convince you that you cannot create your own, that you cannot nation build, that you cannot return to your homeland and actually live better than what you are here, is because the propaganda has taught you that, or showed you that in Africa, African people, they're in dysfunction. They haven't built anything great. They haven't done anything great. This is what the propaganda machine shows you. And of course, they're always showing you the examples of puppet leaders who were not the original Pan-Africanists who led the movement to revolution on the continent of Africa, because many of those Pan-Africanists have either been ousted out of power or have been assassinated. And instead of the actual freedom fighters, we're given examples of people who are put in place by Western governments in order to serve Western governments. And when we see these countries that are serving Western governments, because the politicians and the leaders are serving Western governments, the people are dying. The people are starving. They don't have their basic necessities. They don't have access to the richness of their own soil. They don't have access to the richness of their own land. They don't have access because instead you have these people who are put in power to serve the colonial masters, acting as though they're supposed to be the leader of the nation, but they're really not. They're instead a puppet to give the impression that they're represented by the people, or they're elected by the people, but really they're only there to take what they can for their own good that the Western powers are willing to give them, and to sell out the interest of the people. So this is all to say that we've been given this image that these broken governments, these broken systems, that's what it is. It's a broken system. Anytime that you can have a dictator, that means inside of a country doing these types of things, that means that there's a fundamental problem with the political system, all the way up to the president, all the way down to the people. The relationship that has been created between the people and between the elected officials is completely broken. Because of that, you can't just elect a new politician. You can't just, get Mugabe out of there and get some new guy in. No, you have to actually restructure the whole government, because there should never be any type of reason why a leader should have that much of an ability to oppress the people unreproached. And that's what we have, unreproached power to these people who are not fighting for the interest of Africans, instead fighting for their own self-interest. So what we're shown of Africa, that's not what Africa could be. The better representation would be to look back at the empires that existed prior to colonialism. And when you look back at those, when you look back at the Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, when you look back at all the many empires that have happened throughout the continent, what you see is that people were building nations, and they were not doing it in a greedy way. They were not doing it in a way to oppress their brothers and sisters. Instead, they were doing it in such a way to ensure that the whole community, the collective, actually benefited from these actions. That's completely contrary to the Western worldview that everyone should be fine, that everyone should be doing well, that everyone should be living equitably together. But the fact is, that is what is in our nature and what has always worked best for us. Anytime you have ever imposed Western mindsets on us, it causes dysfunction in us because it's not in our nature to be selfish. It's not in our nature to be power hungry, money hungry, to want to do things at the detriment of our own people. So as Dr. Amos Wilson so correctly pointed out, we have been possessed by a demon, a white supremacist demon that teaches us to do things against our own people. But this demon is not of us. It's not who we are as people. We really are a caring, sharing, mutual, beneficial people. Anytime you look at old African societies prior to colonialism, they were all about collectivism. They were all about sharing the resources. They were all about doing for each other, and the individual was not a factor. It was always about the community above the individual. So these are things to just understand, that what we see in Africa today, that's not what we should take as Africa being. Instead, we should understand that we do have the ability, look back in your history, we do have the ability to build. We do have the ability to see a new Africa. And when I say we, I'm not saying African Americans just going back to Africa and basically doing what happened in Liberia, which is you had some African Americans that went back to Liberia who were shipped on ships. I believe it was the American Colonization Society, some also from Britain. And their attitude was not to go back to join the people. Their attitude was to go back and colonize the people. So you had African Americans who were free from slavery and they're now back on their continent being Africans, but no, they're not being Africans because they're acting as supremacists. They're doing what was taught to them. They're acting out of the evil demon that has been inflicted on them by being under white oppression. And that is that they feel like that they can't be accepting of others, feeling like they have to dominate, feeling like it has to be my way, not understanding that we are very tolerant people. We are very tolerant of different religions. We're very tolerant of different types of people who want to do different things. But that wasn't the attitude that the people in Liberia who went to Liberia went back with. Instead, they had a lot of the colonial mindsets. We're going to do this in Africa, even if that's not what the Africans want to do. So that's not what we're calling for at all when we say New Africa. What we're calling for is a joining of Africans in the diaspora with Africans on the continent together with a ideology that is together and that would push each other towards a goal of mutual liberation, and not to have the dominating voice, but to be a part of this, because it's just as much as our homeland as it is your homeland. The fact is that we have been snatched from our homeland. However, we have just as much as a claim to that homeland, and therefore it would be a brotherhood, a sisterhood. It would not be a colonial relationship. The other thing I want to point out before I get into the specifics of this platform is that we have to also look at what we mean by going back to Africa. What we've seen with Kanye West, and Kanye West has been up to so much, and I'm kind of getting tired of talking about him. He keeps doing so many things. So we kind of see what happened with him is that he said, okay, I'm going to go back to Africa. And a lot of people were like, okay, well, whatever. And what does he do when he goes back to Africa? He basically parties it up with the Ugandan president of Uganda. And if you know anything about this president, he's actually bad news. He's actually very oppressive. There's actually a whole issue going on with Bobby Wine, who is a politician in Uganda, who was severely beaten by this regime. His driver was murdered by this president's people, and there's a whole cover-up behind that. And then Bobby Wine is being charged with treason. And there's a lot of evidence that all of these are trumped up charges trying to destroy this man because he is a possible political opponent. And he's also very much appearing to be for the people. And this regime is so oppressive and so hungry for power, because this is one of the regimes that has been in power for decades and decades and decades, and are not trying to let go. And the reason why people would have a problem with certain people maintaining power, but not these people, because this regime has catered to the United States, catered to Western powers. Because they've catered, the Western powers have treated them well and have allowed them to continue their oppressive regime, because it ultimately is about their own benefit. So the reason I'm pointing this out is to say that Kanye West going to Uganda and partying up with an oppressive neo-colonialist puppet is not what we're talking about when we talk about going back to Africa. We're not going back to Africa for photo ops. We're not going back to Africa for just the opportunity to say we went back to Africa so we can say, hey, you know, we're down now, we went back to Africa. The real issue is ridding the continent of neocolonialism, ridding the continent of the same type of people that the president of Uganda, people like the president of Uganda, the president of Congo, the president of Cameroon, ridding the continent of these people who are bloodsuckers, who are only taking from the people, pretending that they're there for the people, but they're only there for themselves, because frankly, being a dictator in Africa that serves Western interests is very profitable. So that's not what we're talking about when we say go back to Africa. It's not about a trip. A lot of it is about a fight. It's about a fight for our rightful homeland. It's also about a changing of the mind. And I also want to say before I move on, this is not for every African American. It's not for every black person. Because a lot of you, as Marcus Garvey said, I'd hate to say it like this, but I think Marcus Garvey said it very well. A lot of you aren't doing good here. So you would not do good in Africa. So this isn't for you necessarily. And maybe you're on the fence, you're like, I don't know, you know, what does Africa have to offer? That's fine. This is also about re-educating ourselves and also just opening ourselves up to the possibilities. And so if you're just someone who just is not sure whether or not you could see yourself 10, 15 years down the line resettling in Africa, just be open and learn as we try to gain more information and gain more context. But if you're someone who's like, yo, I'm not African, I'm just American, blah, blah, blah. Like, this is cool. You can do that. You know, you can see how that works out for you. But anyone who understands economics right now and understands what's going on as far as the economy of the U.S. and really Western economies, period, but the U.S. is really, a lot of people are nervous. I mean, a lot of people are saying there's going to be a economic downturn any second now, probably within a year or two. The reason is the U.S. dollar has tanked. The U.S. is in a severe debt. And of course, there's a trade war going on with China. The Federal Reserve is printing off a lot of money. There's just so many reasons that people are saying that the U.S. economy is not going to be as glorious as people expected it to be. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone, but I'm saying that to say you have a doomsday being predicted by a lot of United States white professors. And at the same time, when you actually look at Africa and what it has to offer, what you learn is that there's a lot of potential, a lot of untapped resources over there that we, even having our Westernized education, albeit, but we have certain skills that our people unfortunately haven't have access to because they've been starved from those same opportunities. So we have some skills, a lot of us, and a lot of us, we have enough money to actually start a business in Africa that you might not have the money to start in America, because the money is not there in America. The money for property, the money for bank loans, all that, we might not have any of that. You could actually go back to Africa and have so much more success because the resources, because of the cheap land, the cheap labor, you would actually have more, and also the wealth of black people to support your business. You would actually have so much more business perspective. And so that's just something to think about whenever you're thinking about, well, you know, I'm in the middle, blah, 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 America or Africa, I don't know. Just think that there is a lot of nervous rhetoric coming out of people who are looking at the American economy right now, and also understand that there's a lot of people running to Africa who want what Africa has to offer. But ironically, African people are not running to Africa. You're either on a continent running away from Africa, or you're away from the continent. You're somewhere in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in Europe, China, wherever. And you, instead of going back or wanting to go back, running back like the other countries are trying to run to your homeland. You would rather disengage from what's going on there. You would rather dissociate yourself from Africa. These are learned behaviors and top behaviors, because understand, anytime that there's been a gathering of African people, particularly in the diaspora, who wanted to go back, there's always been resistance from Western governments because of what we know. We know a lot. And it's not to say that other Africans don't know what we know. Some of them just haven't had opportunities to and had access to the same things that we've had access to. But even just simple things as far as understanding the psychology of racism, we know a lot about that. And I've talked to a lot of people. When you look at different cultures, different African people throughout different places, whether you're on a continent and whether you're in Europe or something, you'll notice there's different levels of I guess consciousness, but I don't want to say consciousness. It's like levels of being on the edge. And African Americans, we're very on the edge because we have had racism happen to, in my opinion, as far as the length of time that it's been going on, and as also as far as the severity put together, I would say that we've had the most extreme, the most, I don't want to say, we've had one of the most extreme, because then I think about different things that have happened, such as things in South Africa or things inside of the Congo, but we've had one of the most extreme experiences directly with white people. So there wasn't no black person who was pretending to, there wasn't no black person who was the intermediary person who was doing these things to us. A lot of times it was the white people doing this directly to us. Because we've had that experience, we're so on edge. And some people think it's bad. Some people think, oh, that's the race card, or you're always pulling a race card, or you're always, thinking about racism. You always think everything is racism. I actually think everything is racism. When you look at the bottom of everything, maybe not the racism that we call out in a particular moment, but racism is really like in every single thing to me. Like, this is a mic right here. This is racism to me. What is this mic made of? Is this mic made of things that come from the African continent that have been taken from the people for the purpose of white supremacy and against black people having control over their own resources? That's racism. And it might not be a we hate black people racism, but white supremacy, the ability to take something from black people for the preservation of the white race or other race other than Africans, this is all racism. So we're very on edge about that. So I do think everything is racism in some type of way. But that gives us a benefit, I think. When you think about dealing with colonialism and dealing with neo-colonialism, the benefit that we have is that we have had so much experience. And I think because of that experience, we need people at the table when we're talking about a free Africa to think about every single scenario. Every single scenario, because we've dealt with them in so many scenarios. You need people like Amos Wilson to tell you the intricacies of the mind, as far as, the fact that white people understand that we have to think a certain way in order for them to maintain their power. You need people like a Stokely Carmichael. You need people who have had these experiences, these severe experiences with the racist system, in order to tell you exactly how the oppressor operates. Because I think one thing I noticed a lot when I study a lot of African leaders in history, or even today, is that sometimes you'll have some who have they have a good agenda. They have, okay, we're going to help our people, we're going to do this for our people, we're going to do that for our people. But a lot of times they underestimate their enemy. They underestimate. I think Kwame Nkrumah, as great as he was, he really underestimated the West. He did. I mean, thinking, oh, I can just start a relationship with China. No, they were not going to have that. So many African leaders, that just one, but we can go through a whole plethora. They underestimate and even modern Ghana, I think it's Kofi Afuro, I believe his name, the current president of Ghana. But if you look at what he was saying he did the French speech, if you haven't, look back at it, look up President of Ghana's speech with the French president. It's hilarious, but if you see him, he's actually saying things that should be commonly agreed upon. Africans should not be depending on Europeans. Africans should be self-sufficient. We should not be begging France for money. And the French president is looking at him like, how dare you say these things? Why is there a difference in as far as attitudes? Because he doesn't anticipate the fact that what you're saying, it should be common sense, but that's actually to the detriment of France. France lives off of creating the mindset that you need us. No, you can't be anything without us. So to him, that was a threat against his national security. And that's what I'm saying. We have to have people who are thinking about all of these inner intricacies. Because if you don't, you're not going to have New Africa, because New Africa also has to be protected against colonialism and neocolonialism. Based on what we know. We have a history. We need to study our history. We need to study how to ensure that these things don't happen again. And that's why you need people who are very sensitive to racism. And again, sometimes we pop off maybe at the wrong thing at the wrong time, but racism is something in everywhere. That's really my belief. So I'm going to move on. Kind of stayed on this point a lot longer than I intended, but so FAL, as I said, our platform is Back to New Afrika. Now, we are partnering with an organization called Kimchi Africa. The founder of Kimchi is a sister named Rosemary Olive Mbone Nie. Sorry if I said your name, if I messed up your name. And she is a sister who has been working on this organization from Tanzania. So this is someone who actually has contacts with different African countries. And her goal as a person of Tanzania is actually to see African Americans return to Africa for the purpose of developing eco-communities. So they have a website. It's called kecinafrica.com. You can look up and read more about it. But I'm going to go through some of the points of this vision that they have. And to me, you know, the reason why I was excited, and I think the reason why FAL as an organization was excited to partner with her, is because the vision was so complete. And you could tell that this is not something that's wishful. This is something that's actually obtainable. And I actually need to look up. She mentioned, you know, there are actual countries in Africa that have actually said that they are willing to partner with these type of initiatives. So it's not something that is just thrown. So some of the countries she told us was there's African people in Ghana, Senegal, Liberia, and Tanzania who have given us a green light to start this project. So this is not some wishful thing. This is not something where we're just in America or in Canada or wherever and just saying, oh, we're going to do this back to Africa. This is actually something where we're doing in collaboration with an organization on the continent of Africa. So I just want to give you that impression that this is not something that just came together. This is actually an organization that is very, very, very concrete. They're very clear on what they want. And we completely align with as far as our agenda. So I'm about to go through this whole thing. Let me drink some water real quick. Okay, so I'm reading from different parts. They have a pamphlet, and you can find this information on their website. But I'm going to just go through a lot of their vision. So we envision the reemergence of a sustainable and abundant Africa growing out of an alliance of self-empowered and resilient African and African-American communities. Kimchi's mission is that as a solution-based alliance of Africans and African Americans, Kimchi Africa makes visible examples of best practices and develops educational and knowledge-building tools to inspire African societal transition to resilience. So to go through a few of the points that the organization has come up with to achieve their goal. So it says, Kimchi Africa works towards the realization of a more just, equitable, and sustainable society for Africans and migrant African Americans through education, capacity building, and advocacy, promoting the development of curricular derived from good practice and experience within eco communities. And just to give you a definition of what an eco community is, this is a Wikipedia definition, but it says a traditional or intentional community with the goal of becoming more socially, culturally, economically, and ecologically sustainable. It is consciously designed through locally owned participatory processes to regenerate and restore its social and natural environments. So basically, you know, right now, a lot of us, we live in situations where we are in communities, but we're not in communities that are designed to be helping one another, designed to do what's best for the community. Also have communities that are economically sustainable. A lot of African communities, for example, they do things such as they'll import European concrete in order to build something like a building, not knowing that right around the corner you have a beautiful plethora of natural resources you could be using to build that building. You have wood, you have stones, there's so many ecological things, but the mindset has been that you have to get these materials or things from outside of the continent. So that's not economically sustainable. And it's not using the resources that Africa has. So that's just an example of a way that we could be ecologically sensitive to our environment and understand that instead of importing these materials, importing these things that really do not further our cause or further our environment, that we could actually obtain materials that are naturally available to us for the purpose of furthering our cause. Okay, so a model eco community provides holistic designs for urban and rural communities for sustainable living environment. Training and knowledge centers provide education, training, research, and knowledge building. And that's another thing that I noticed about as far as the resources available in the diaspora versus resources on the continent, is that we have so much knowledge, we have so much ability to actually go back to Africa and provide education or training and give our skills to our brothers and sisters, but a lot of us don't do it. So that's another huge opportunity that we have as African people to actually not just see any Africa, but see an Africa that is free from colonialism and free from people who don't understand how to take the natural resources that are available to them and actually build something that's going to further their cause. And you see this, you know, I'll just give you a quick example. So as I said, with the natural resources, so for me right now, me and my husband, we're trying to at some point maybe build a house or something, and we're doing our research and we're trying to do it in Ghana, and we're trying to do it sustainably. We're trying to do it with African resources. However, a lot of the problem is that a lot of these resources, such as bamboo, something like that, there's a wealth of bamboo in Africa, but people have not been trained to use bamboo. They've only been trained to use European construction items, or wood. They're not been trained to use these things. So because of that, the issue is, well, you have the bamboo, but you don't have the people who are trained to actually ensure that the house is going to be stable. These are huge opportunities. These are huge ways that we can actually help, and not just help, but actually have something for us, so have a reason and a purpose, and actually further ourselves while we further our continent, because these are so easily and readily available. And if you have construction knowledge, you know how to use these things. Imagine if all the bamboo in Africa, if the people actually got wind of like how valuable this is in other places, and were able to construct things and ship them out to other places. That is a wealth of knowledge that could seriously change the dynamics of what's going on in the continent. But it's all about, as the Kimchi initiative says, it's all about training and knowledge centers. We have to spread training of our people, and we have to also give them knowledge about these different issues, different opportunities that exist in the continent. So they also say, and this is a very important issue, permaculture, organic agriculture, and food sovereignty. Kimchi promotes communities that are self-reliant, independent, and enjoy abundance of local foods. We promote teaching of theory and practical skills in organic and permaculture for people and communities across Africa. If y'all don't know, and this is the case in America, and this is the case in Africa, because it's the case everywhere, the food is like really what's killing a lot of our people. It's the food. A lot of times it's not gun violence. It's not the health care, not having health care. A lot of times it's just the food you're eating that's killing our people. So when you look at things like processed foods, processed meats that we're ingesting so much of, because a lot of people don't understand that the American diet was not created for our bodies. So we're already eating things that are not natural to us, they're not natural to our bodies. But not just that, but we're given so many chemicals inside of the food. We're given so many things that change the nature of the food. And a lot of us don't know how to grow our own food. This is something that's been advocated by Nation of Islam for a long time, because this is something that's very important. We have to actually get back to organic food. So it's not just go back to Africa and just, just do what we've always been doing. It's doing something revolutionary also for us and our people, so that we can grow as a people and we can teach our children how to live a better life. Because right now, the things that we're doing as far as ingesting these chemicals, ingesting these insecticides, ingesting these things have a detrimental effect on our bodies. So I thought that was very important. Moving on though. So Kimchi promotes energy autonomy through renewable energy, reforestation, regenerative water cycles, healthy soils, and mutually beneficial relationship with wildlife. Africa is the cradle of civilization, and so Kimchi strives to apply the eco-community movement profoundly based on diversity of tangible and intangible African cultural heritage. As far as peace building and healing and reconciliation, Kimchi Africa value lies in the success of authentic peace building, healing and reconciliation between Africa and descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States. As far as green and ethical business, fair trade, Kimchi must assure self-reliant and independent communities by providing a progressive eco-community business model through green, ethical business and fair trade. And lastly, Kimchi will be a city of African American repatriates, I don't know if I said that right, to be honest, and migrants, providing services such as medical and dental care, regional medical facilities, veterinarian services, geologists, agriculturalists, engineers, ecologists, an African American professional business hub, student and professional exchange services and governance, as well as schools, teachers, public transportation, and more. There will be work through locally owned participatory processes to design a pathway into future which combines the best solution in economy, ecology, social, and cultural, while focused on reversing desertification and achieving sustainable development goals such as renewable energy, self-sustainable food supplies, earth restoration projects, service to local population needs, on-site manufacturing industries, communal decision-making, and establish bonding and connection to the local community. So that's just a very, I chose some information. It's a little choppy. Again, I encourage you to go to the website. But that's just some of the information that the eco-communities would look like. So you have a community that's sustainable. You have a community that is not just polluting making the earth something that we cannot live happily on, but also one that is collectivist based, where all the people are making decisions together, and also one that is inviting African Americans with trades and with professions to come back to Africa and actually use those trades and professions for the purpose of furthering the skills and the development of our continent. So this is an initiative that is so well drawn out, as I said, and Assistant Rosemary actually also added to me that they are looking for next year to invite 5,000 African Americans to visit Tanzania the second week of October for 2 weeks. They would be very happy to have any FAL members, or I'll even say people who are just associated with FAL, but if you want to go on behalf of FAL, they are happy to have members as volunteers to help kickstart the building of the first eco community. So this has been a lot, I know. So I'm just going to sum this up to say that this is our initiative. We're really pushing for this, that if you are someone who does want to return home, you don't see a reasonable future in this country for yourself, for your family, or maybe you are okay with right now, but you're looking back at your grandkids, and you're looking like, wow, this is going to be the world that I leave them in. This is going to be the condition I leave them in. I would really rather do something to work towards their future so that they don't have to suffer the same hell that I suffered, that my ancestors suffered. If this is how you think, then this is something that I think you can get behind. And this is not saying, okay, everyone, we're going back to Africa next year. We're going back to Africa in 5 years, 10 years. But this is about working to build that connection and working to build that reality. So if you are someone who's interested in working towards this, eco communities, having communities of African Americans, and also, you know, Kimchi also advocates these communities for Africans on the continent, but this particular program is for African Americans. If you're looking to be a part of that initiative, to actually have a part in furthering this, then there's two things. One, I started a Google group called Back to New Afrika, and you could join that Google group. That would be more substantive, so we'll have more information about the initiative and what's going on, and we want that to be very interactive. We want people who are going to join and actually going to give their ideas. We have people in FAL already who are part of BAIO, for example, so if that's something that you're a part of, this should be something that you could offer ideas with as well. That's what that would be for. And also a Facebook group. Of course, Facebook is not for planning, strategic planning. However, Facebook is very good, I think, for getting information out. It's also very good for sharing, sharing inspirational quotes sometimes, but also sharing information quickly. Not everyone checks their email all the time. I noticed that myself. So, you know, a lot of people check their Facebook though. So there's two things, a Facebook group and there's a Google group under FAL. And those groups are both called Back to New Afrika. So those descriptions will be probably inside of a comment box, a pinned comment box. And so you can click on those. So in conclusion, I just want to say, you know, again, this is not for everyone, but if you are someone who is seriously concerned about the condition that our people are living in, that you are living in, and whether or not you want to go immediately, you certainly want to work towards a free Africa that is good for you and your children. You want to work towards building an Africa that's good for your children, and maybe you can't go today, but if we can get started and actually start building, we can certainly go. So if you're someone that's like that, come on, join the initiative. And again, there's going to be links probably inside of a pinned comment for you to join the groups, and we're going to try to have some people go out there next year in October and actually support the initiative. So that is all I have for you all. I hope to see you on the live streams. We have 2 live streams again, and so we hope to see you on the one this Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you all, and I will see you on another video.